One of the biggest questions of our age is the question of identity. The question of identity. Who are we? What does it mean to be a human being? The identity question is a massive one. Well, you could, of course, ask it on two levels. You can ask it at the large level. Who are we as human beings? Are we just atoms and particles and molecules? Or is there something more to us? But we can also ask the question at a personal level. Who am I? What is my identity? Now, interestingly, historically, the identity question tended to be answered for us from outside. So society or family, those sort of authoritarian sort of forces, as it were, would answer the identity question for us. So perhaps you were defined by the town that you lived in, or the community you were part of, the nation that you were part of, or perhaps your family defined who you were, your class, working class, middle class, upper class defined who you were. This happened in terms of career too. Often people would do the same jobs that their ancestors had done. So, maybe the reason you would be a police officer is because your dad was a police officer, your brother was a police officer, your uncle, your auntie, your granddad, and so on. We lived in these narrow grooves where identity was defined for us. We've now as a society largely rejected the idea that others get to set our identity for us. We see that as oppressive. Now we live in this very liberated age where we're encouraged to choose our own identity. Find the identity that works for you. Find your true self and bring it to work and celebrate it and so on and so forth. And that's offered as very liberating. But I want to gently suggest that move from society setting our identity to we choose our identity actually brings its own set of problems. Two in particular. The first problem that comes if I'm encouraged to create my own identity and proclaim it is what happens if I proclaim my identity as one thing and my colleague sitting next to me has a very different identity that actually clashes with mine. They're not actually compatible. And we've seen this in society right now because there are all kinds of battles going on in our culture because, a group of people with one identity are clashing with a group of people with another identity, and it seems very hard to reconcile those things. And if you really want to see that in practice, just go to hang out on Twitter for half an hour and watch people shout at each other in capital letters, often all around these deep questions of identity. It doesn't seem to have brought liberation and harmony, it's just brought tribalism. But the other thing that choosing one's own identity can do, as well as tribalism, it can also create fragility. Because if my identity is something that I create for myself, suddenly I now need my colleagues and friends to affirm it. It's not enough for them just to go, "Oh, Andy, that's lovely that you self-identify that way." I want them to go, "Oh, absolutely, you are absolutely that thing. Oh, yes, we affirm that." And I need that affirmation, or suddenly I feel insecure and anxious. And so we now have these very fragile identities that we're desperately hanging on to and hoping people don't criticize or question or fail to affirm. And so it rather feels that we've jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. We've switched one problematic view of identity, the oppressive, it's forced on me, to another problem, it's very, very fragile. Is there a better way? Well, I happen to think, as a Christian, that there is. Because I think the question of identity, like so many of these big questions, directly plugs into the question of faith and spirituality. And one of the things that I love about being a Christian and being a follower of Jesus is it gives a rock solid foundation for my identity that is neither fragile nor oppressive. When I became a follower of Jesus over 30 years ago, for me it felt very much like discovering what it was I was meant to be as a human being. I believe that actually a relationship with God is what we are created for. And that gives me an identity that's not oppressive because it's what I'm supposed to be. In the same way that, when a fish loves to swim and is made for water, birds are made to fly, human beings, I believe, are made for a relationship with their creator. And it was deeply liberating. But at the same time, it's also secure. Nobody can take it away from me. No matter how I'm questioned or challenged, my identity is not resting on what other people think of me. It's resting on what God thinks of me. And the Bible tells me how much God thinks of me because it tells me that God loves me so much that he gave the life of his son to die for me. That incredible gift is also an incredible foundation for an identity that is not fragile and is not oppressive, but is actually deeply liberating.